Calling to order the short-term rental task force regular meeting for July 20th, 2023. Jamie, will you call the roll?
Udit,
Here.
Van,
Here.
Hart,
Here.
Clark,
Here.
Anderson,
Here.
Bengali,
Here.
Morama,
Here.
Deal,
Here.
Van, here. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Need a motion to approve the agenda with all of the words saying that you're moving to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting, July 20th, 2023. I will second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, it comes to the first public comment period. Minutes. Thank you. Thank you. We need a motion to approve the minutes.
It's Joe Clark. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
All right, now we get to open public comments. So just a reminder, again, 3-minute limit for this public comment period. Your comment has to pertain to one of the items that's on the agenda. So before you make your comment, if you can provide your full name, where you live, and then what agenda item you are addressing. So is there anyone in the room that would like to make a comment? All right, anyone on Zoom? Okay, we'll close the public comments. So now the review and discussion, starting with the additional short-term rental data and maps. Ryan, any context from you before we turn it over to Kyle?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Apologize. In your packet, you guys discussed quite a bit of data last time, and so I kind of took some of that feedback and produced some additional maps that you were looking for. And then we can put these on the screen so that way the public's able to see them as well, and certainly include them in your next meeting packet for anybody that wishes to see them. Since your packet went out, I did forward you a couple other additional data items. One was kind of an Excel spreadsheet that kind of breaks down some of the map data that you're seeing. So total parcels, number of parcels by zoning district that have residentially assessed classification, number of PREs, no PREs, short-term rentals that are certified. And then I kind of also forwarded kind of some updated analysis that they've done that you asked for since your last meeting. So if it's okay, I'd turn it over to Mr. Mucha for kind of to run you through what they brought forward.
Great.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ryan. Is there any, I guess, first questions on the additional Excel sheet? We tried to just distill down further what was requested last time. As Ryan indicated, it talks about total parcels, residential. We looked at mapping, which is also in your packet, the PRE versus non-PRE. So homestead versus non-homestead. I know this was a question. This was data provided by the city. So if there is other alternatives or thoughts that task force members have about the numbers, this is what we and Ryan are working with on that. I'm sure it could be maybe cleaned up more. There might be others to it, but this is what we have been working with staff on that. So that's the Excel sheet. Just again, as requested by the task force last time, the memo that Jamie has eventually too on there was just to clean up a little bit, a little further dive into the data analysis that Chris provided at your last meeting. I'm happy to go over any of that. However, it's just more, we want to treat it kind of as supplemental to the task force, since we've already kind of discussed the data and where we think, where we're seeing the trends at. I'll pause there for questions.
I have one question on the spreadsheet. Is that, so if we're looking at calculating percentages of short-term rentals, either overall or within a district, is 904 the denominator for overall?
That's what we have, yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to be sure I was reading that correctly. Steve, did you have a question?
I do have a question. I'm just trying to get the numbers between some of the maps and here. So we say 1,246 total parcels.
Correct.
Then 904 out of the 1,246 is what we're showing as residential. Then what's the pre and non? Because if I add the pre and non up, I get 1,267.
That was again provided by us. I don't have a good answer for you on that one, Steve.
And again.
Not trying to put Ryan on the
this
spot
thing, but
either.
I'm trying to
Yeah.
understand, like, if you have 1,246 parcels, how do we have 1,267 pre and non-pre? So I.
The Excel sheet that we're working with could have parcels listed twice in there as well. It could be a
And then-
cleanup, could be an oversight on some of that in there.
Then the 259 short-term rental certified, I'm assuming that means licensed, 259 licenses.
Yes, so
Correct.
our team looked at that, and we had an internal discussion on this as well. When we mapped out the data provided, again, this is not any slight of the city, it's just how it came across when we tried to map this out. We found that there were certified and non-certified, meaning for us that when you look at your packets of 6 and 7 on here, there's two different maps that show similar items. That's because some of
Next
the
question.
parcel items listed in that data set were counted twice or shown twice. There was a few properties that may have had 3 or 4 STRs assigned to them, but when we map them, they show as a single parcel. So our team made the 2 different maps to account for both of those scenarios. One being just mapping the parcels themselves that had STR and then mapping the STRs themselves. So some of these did stack on top of each other, but it's not because of the scale, we can't zoom in far enough to show you that there might be multiple STRs to some capacity on a single parcel.
So we have 300 parcels, but you're saying some of the parcels could have multiple STRs.
Correct.
Which means the STR should be greater than the parcels. But the parcels is less than the STRs. So if you're saying that the parcels could have multiple short-term rentals,
Mhm.
then the short-term rental certified number should be more than the parcel numbers. So how do we have 300 parcels, but 259 certified short-term rentals? Where do 300 parcels come from? That's what I'm curious of.
Yeah.
Is that zoning approval as opposed to the annual renewal certificate?
No, I think that.
So originally-
since all of our zones have short-term rental eligibility, we'd have many more that would be eligible. for short-term rental.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what's, I mean, so you say like data was provided by the city, so we provided, like a list of all of our, going back as far as we could go, anything that's ever been certified as a short-term rental. Initially when this, and then we kind of took that, we had a report from our assessor as far as each parcel and whether, what its PRE level was 0, 100, something in between. And so and then they had parcel maps from, or parcel data from the county, which my understanding from our assessor is not always completely up to date. It takes time to do that. So it's kind of a few different data sources that they're taking and then trying to kind of map it and overlay it and that sort of thing. So initially, it wouldn't be uncommon to have multiple short-term rental certificates for one property. If, for example, they have an accessory dwelling unit and a single family dwelling, there may be some properties that have multiple dwellings, maybe multiple, apartments or something along those lines.
But then the number of short-term rentals should be higher than the number of parcels.
Well, is it possible though that a parcel could exist that could be a short-term rental, but it doesn't currently have a license? That's what I assumed the difference was, that because some people are renewed, some people on one of the charts, I think, I can't remember what McKenna called them, the repeats.
Right.
So there's some parcels that are eligible to be short-term rented, but they don't currently have a license. I don't know if that's the difference,
I don't
but
know if that would be because almost every one of our zones allows short-term rentals. So that would be like 90% of our parcels could be short-term rentals.
No.
So that part of it. And then I didn't understand the chart on page 6 shows short-term rental parcels 209 in total. So now we
Right.
got 209 versus 259. So the only reason I'm looking at this is that numbers could become very important for us.
No, I agree.
Everybody starts to,
Madam Chair, if I could on that.
Yeah.
So the number of parcels that we classified from the parcel data that we had provided. So when we asked the city to assess the parcel ID numbers, we then need to join that to, like Ryan said, the county data for parcels. So by doing that, then not looking at how many are stacked on top of each other, but just the parcels themselves that had an STR assigned to it was 209. And then map 7 on your packet shows all the parcels that had STRs stacked on top of each other. So maybe like, as Ryan indicated, might be an apartment complex or a multifamily unit that has multiple. So
That
that's
would
how
make
we get to
sense.
that. We'll be honest with you, Steve, trying to map this has been a challenge for us, trying to get it all to code. Like Ryan said, there's like 3 or 4 different data points we're using. We're using wonderful information from the city, but then we're also reliant on the county for parcel data. We're reliant on possibly the state for other information as we map this out. So trying to get all of that to mash together, it can be fraught with challenge. And then on
So-
top of that,
Yeah.
depending on how the city classifies parcel numbers and then how the county does for the shape files, if they don't fully align, space for space, or if there's an extra space on it, they won't match.
Right. So I think, page 7, I see what your question is. And that's something that we certainly can double check. So initially, when Kyle sent me the maps, I was like, why do we have less short-term rentals that are certified than we did last month? That doesn't make sense. We have more. So, and then, when they dug into, the mapping, they were showing the issue where we had multiple short-term rentals on some properties. So like your map on page 6, I think is showing you there's 209 parcels that have at least one short-term rental on them. So
Correct.
Okay, so that's the
So the-
number of parcels.
And then on 7,
That is mapping out all the ones that have stacked on top of each other. So there might
Okay,
be parcels
okay.
that are double, triple, or quadruple counted
okay,
on that. And that's assigned with how we have records of the STRs approved themselves.
okay, Ann?
I have a question. So in a case like where you have a home, I think additional dwelling units, so there's a home that the people live in, but they have a garage with a studio above.
Mhm.
Would that be considered 2 parcels then?
No.
No, okay.
nope, but you can, one parcel, but we have 2 short-term rental certificates because each dwelling has its own short-term rental certificate, even though they may have to be rented together under a single contract. They still have their own inspection and occupancy.
Because we also have a couple properties too, where the homeowners they have short-term rental certificates,
Mhm.
but they've opted not to rent this summer and they're staying in their own, so we have, a handful of those as well. And I was just wondering if that's like.
So that would, yeah, I mean, unless they were like to notify the city and say, we're not renting and we want to, cancel our certificate,
Yeah.
then, I mean,
Okay,
for our purposes, I guess it would still show active.
okay, so it's
Yeah.
active, okay.
And then
Go ahead, Steve.
Can you explain just so I understand, the difference between the map on page 6 versus the map on page 8. The legend says certified short-term rentals, 209 total parcels. And on page 8, it says certified short-term rentals, 259 total parcels. So the legend is exactly the same between page 6 and page 8. But yet the numbers are 25% different.
Correct, because like I said, my understanding of page 6 is that it's showing you each parcel that has at least one short-term rental. It may have 1, may have 2, may have 3. So so if you're looking at, like, the concern before was that if you take the total number of short-term rentals and just divide them by the number of parcels you have, well, that may not be accurate as far as how many parcels you have in the city that actually have a short-term rental, at least one on them. So depending on how you look at this, okay, well, 209 of our parcels have at least one short-term rental or more on them. And if you compare that to your total number of short-term or total parcels, that may change your calculus and how you view the
But-
issue.
And then, Madam Chair, just to help,
Let's try like, one says 200, I'm just reading what it said. It says certified short-term rental parcels on both of them.
so Steve, there's a clarification on that. So underneath on page 8 of your maps,
Right.
there's 3 data sets we're showing on that legend. It's just certified short-term rentals, 259. Below that is our legend for parcels, but it's faint and that's as a copy and issue, not just how it showed up on our map. We'll make the parcel lines thicker. So you actually have 3 different things, 3 different items we're showing here. So it's not a run-on sentence. It's actually parcels is its own standalone data set on here. So that's the 259 is its own.
And
Oh,
the
I know.
250 the short-term rent is the 259.
Yeah.
That makes
Yes.
sense.
Yeah, no, so parcels is its own
Without
own
seeing
category.
that legend, it looks
Oh.
like they both say exactly.
Right.
the
Yep,
same
so if you
thing.
look.
It does.
Jamie has it pulled up here. It's a little easier to see on the screen that you'll see the parcel underneath below that in the legend. Yeah. Yeah.
So 209 parcels have short-term rental certificates At least one short-term rental certificate, and some of those
Correct.
parcels have multiple certificates, which gets you up to a total of 259. Correct?
But way better than I did, yes.
So, oh, go ahead, Lauren.
We had to dumb you down.
Okay.
I'm just saying, when you look at it, you can actually see the parcels outlined, and they're like white chunks of land.
Right.
You just
Oh.
can't see it on the paper.
Okay, got it.
That makes sense.
Okay.
300 is.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
So the 300, Steve, will confirm, but that was looking at mapping all of them out. And then, so if an STR, if a parcel had multiple STRs on it, that is counting that as a multiple parcel. So, 1, 2, 3 Sesame Street, just like for giggles here. If they have 4 STRs, it's going to show up as 4 parcels on that map.
Got it.
So there's 209. Have at least.
Actual
an
physical
STR,
parcels, yes.
259. If you include the ones who have multiples. Then the 300 is ones who have more than 2. No, okay.
Yeah, I'm confused.
So,
I
300.
just get there with 300. That's-
yeah,
Yeah, I think,
for the, oh, go ahead, Ryan.
well, I think the 300 probably, we probably show that in a different way. It's probably would be more beneficial to have, okay. And Kyle and I talked about this, part of it was time crunch. And whether or not there's the ability to do this. But okay, if it has one, show it one color. If it has, 2 or more, show it a different color. And then, if you were to see like, okay. 209, we know at least have one, so you're gonna see 209, and then you would probably see another color that shows, 300 minus 209, and that should be your other number, so.
So going back to the Excel sheet, if we just look at those columns, so total parcels, got that. It's all of the parcels in the city. For residential, so that 904 number are the properties or dwellings that are eligible to be short-term rented. It's sort of the population, the potential.
Madam Chair,
It's the
no,
parcels.
that is what is classified as in your zoning district. The 904 is classified.
We'd have to back out the zones that don't, which is only a couple of them that don't. show this.
So we don't have a denominator for short-term rentals.
No, so that would be under property class. That was what's considered residential.
All right, so I'm looking at the second and third column that says residential and it's 904. Is that the number of dwelling units that could be short-term rented?
I wouldn't draw that yet because there's going to be other factors within that. If they're eligible, not eligible, if they meet ordinance requirements. So I think we're drawing too much of a conclusion that way. This is just what is classified as a residential.
So would it be lower? Could it be higher than that?
I don't have a response for you. We're happy to look into a response for you. I don't want to give any false.
So I just, if it's possible, I think we need to get that denominator nailed down.
For the sake
And
of,
Ryan, it might not be possible.
Yeah, I think there's, like Kyle said, there's just a lot of factors to that.
Yeah.
It's certainly easy to say, okay, we can look at zoning districts that may not allow short-term rentals and take those parcels out of the equation. But if there's a commercial piece of property that right now has a classification, a commercial classification.
how about
then-
this?
Oh,
Right,
Do you think it's close enough that we
Well,
could just? go
That's
ahead.
kind of where I'm at with this. Again, I feel like I'm saying this every week or every time we meet. We are running out of time. And I don't know if we're ever going to get it exactly right, but in my opinion, there's 3 core districts based on the voice from the community and everything we've discussed that needs to be addressed. Like, why are we talking about this, right? We're talking about this. I'm gonna assume to see if we need to put some sort of cap on rentals. The 3 that I feel that we need to maybe focus in and not make these guys like work extra for no reason is community R1, R2, and Peninsula West R1. Those are the 3 based on the maps that I think have the most community feel to our area. And if you add those up, that consists of 525 residential or 525 residential of the 904, which is over 50, it's 58% of the total. That's a big chunk. And so I guess my suggestion is to, let's just hone in on these three areas to come up with whatever we decide to come up with, instead of add things in that are downtown, which I should think should have zero restrictions.
I agree.
I agree. I would take our two out, but
I would
Because
totally
like-
agree that as we move into what we're gonna be making suggestions, that be considered.
I think a majority of the concerns we're hearing are directly related to residential areas.
Right.
So to the extent that we can focus in on those residential areas, I think it's going to give us the biggest bang for our buck in terms of coming up with any level of
Lots
recommendations.
of things that we're discussing, like the good neighbor policy, the websites listing all those things apply to everyone regardless of.
Those, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Like I said, I mean, there's two pains we're trying to address. The compliance of the existing rentals, what we can do to prevent issues to happening in the first place. And if issues do happen, what are the consequences? That's the pain. That's the first pain. The second one is how many is too many?
Yeah,
Right.
Density.
That's it.
that's, I agree. I feel like we need to, like Kevin said, we are definitely running out of time. And I think that there needs to be further discussion or more discussion. I know after the town hearing, we'll probably have a better understanding. But how do we work with the compliance and how, like who's responsible, for enforcing or, or making sure that these are, we're following the proper protocol that has, been put in place. So I think, we're, like I said, I just feel like we're running out of time, so.
Well, and I know we had talked about having a whole discussion on the cap. And
Right.
finally getting to that point on what needs to happen there.
Right.
Whether it's a cap in certain areas, not an overall cap, but in certain residential areas. And we just haven't had, I know we're trying to get to the numbers and try to get as accurate as we can. But I agree with Kevin in that we don't need to worry about certain areas because I think as a whole, we might all agree that the commercial area probably could be left alone. And I also feel like if it's owner occupied, there should be some consideration there.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Cool. Why don't we, yep, Sean.
I just wanted to say, I think the maps helped me understand the city better. I can honestly say I went through the maps and talked to people who had short-term rentals and didn't have short-term rentals. Every story is completely different for whether they had issues with it, whether they liked it, whether they ever met their neighbors or not. So I just think no matter what we present, there's going to be someone who's excited about it. There's someone who's not going to be excited about it. It's a difficult situation, but I think most importantly, I understand where everything's kind of at and where it's going. So I just wanted to say, I do think the maps helped.
Yes. Yep.
I do think that it can't be perfect, but I think the best knowledge I got out of it was understanding what the neighborhoods and what people in the neighborhoods were thinking about and their thoughts on it. And some love the idea of no short-term rentals, some dislike it very much, and some just want to see. I guess probably the biggest thing I got was an enforcement, or like what happens if there is, and that's what I think they really are looking for. Okay, we have something, what happens next?
Right.
And a lot of, I would say maybe 10% to 20% of anyone I ever met, they could rattle off 2 or 3 parcels that had rentals that they knew they didn't have a certificate or had problems and called and didn't get anything accomplished from it. So I think that it kind of goes back to the 3 core things at the beginning of the meetings that we got to kind of go back to for a possible recommendation
Right.
to council. But the maps definitely help me realize.
Yeah.
that.
I thought so too.
Sorry, Madam Chair, but I think it sounds like this is great. We break down these problem areas and not to just kind of get off topic, but is it worth our while to sit and define what we mean when we talk about density? Because it sounds like we can make you can look at the numbers a lot of different ways. Including the ADUs as being a rentable property. Does that make the numerator go up? You know what I'm saying? It seems like if we're almost in violent agreement that we're just going to look at the residential areas, that's great. So now should we take it down a level and say, well, what specific questions are we trying to get out of this data now? Because I'm hearing all these different, we're driving these poor guys crazy looking at the data from different directions. What is, in my mind, and I think you're trying to go there, Steve, what is the total number of addressable units in the residential zone by zone that can be rented? I think that's what we're trying to get as one, right?
Yes, well, I think that if we, as a task force, which I think we should, and we're obligated after we have the town hall meetings to look at all possible things that could occur, including, the discussion of should you have caps? And if you're talking about it, I think you would really need to kind of know what the numbers are before you can really discuss whether or not they should be, and I agree, like with Lauren and some other people have spoken. I can see a difference between somebody who owns and who lives in their home, maybe 50 weeks a year, and they rent for 2 weeks, or they have an ADU and they live in their house all the time, but they're renting their ADU. That to me is like, well, do you handle that differently? But at first, I think, and maybe I'm just speaking, last Madam Chair, but, my understanding was the first part of the, June was a lot of just kind of gathering data. Now we're still looking at more of the numbers. The town hall will happen next week. And then our following meetings, when we really want to start kind of looking at, now that we've heard from everybody, the surveys are over, the town hall's over. How do we want to move forward? What's going to be our resolution?
Yeah,
Caps is definitely one of them. I don't think it's going to be decided. Want to try to do it here today, because what I'm hearing, and Sean, I agree that, I'm hearing a lot of different things from people, but I've got many individuals I've talked to have said, well, maybe you should start with, and this would be things we can discuss next month, but maybe you should start with better enforcement, trying to get more things to prevent things occurring, whether it be the good neighbor, whether it be the policies, whether it gives an 800 number. So and then let's see what happens there. Because the other thing that's happening, and I just saw this, because we have a home that's out in Palm Springs, and they just ran this big article that over 70% of their short-term rentals all had to do price reductions this year because there's so much competition now in their market. And because of the competition, it's like they're actually seeing their short-term rental license requests going down because people buying the new homes at 6% mortgages, they're not really able to charge enough to make it worth, turning it in. So there's also that argument that let's not go too far, when we start talking about resolutions or thoughts in our head, at least. I'm just going to put it out there that, before we start putting, the idea of caps, because again, we got the town hall next week. So I don't want everybody thinking that
Yeah,
we're all
I-
leaning towards that because we're not there yet. So it's just kind of.
I think
we take
that's,
baby steps.
yeah, I think,
I
go
was
ahead.
just trying to answer the question of what's the current density ratio of short-term rentals to dwellings or parcels or whatever. Somebody's going to ask that question. I'd be shocked if they did,
absolutely.
right? And, we've been at this for several months now, and I don't know that I can answer it. Do you guys feel like you can answer it?
No.
Okay, so
Well,
that's all.
Let's-
If you just used R1 as an example, you're roughly at 30%.
Well, you want to use community residential R1, more than one R1.
Yeah. No, I know. I'm just saying,
Because
Brian,
Peninsula North
let-
Neck is
Yep.
also R1.
Brian,
Yeah, I mean, on that point, so I mean, if you're focusing on like R1 residential type districts, and we could, double check and do this analysis, but like, community residential, Peninsula West, like, your numbers are pretty much your numbers right there. I mean, looking at what you're classified as far as residentially assessed properties, because the types of uses in those districts are residential. I mean, with the exception of a religious facility or an essential public services, home business would, be allowed in some of those as well, but pretty much they're residential uses, which are going to be reflected in a residential tax assessment. So if you're focused on those districts, I think your percentages are probably pretty, now some of them, like I said, may have more than one short-term rental on a parcel. And I think that's where maybe some of that drilling down to see, okay, how many have multiple versus one have a single. And I think that probably has some value certainly to you. I think it's what you're asking for, right? It was,
I'm just asking that we be consistent in how we're looking at the data. And are we looking at it? And it can be as simple as we're just looking at the total number of residential parcels, or we're looking at the total number of dwellings. Because they're going to give us two different answers, right?
So I think the question is whether we want to dig into that additional data, because I think that gets back to what we were talking about a minute ago, or as suggested by several, that we say, we'll focus on the residential neighborhoods. We'll assume, to Ryan's point, that to do the density, it would really pretty much be the percentage of short-term rentals of the residential column. Is that?
I'm fine with that as long as we're all saying the same thing. I just want to be able to answer that question.
So excuse me for not understanding, a parcel is like an empty lot, right? Is it not necessarily a dwelling?
A lot, if I'm not.
So someone can technically build and rent on that parcel?
Multiple dwellings.
Multiple, okay, so I think it should be included. If there's an opportunity there, it should be part of it.
But that doesn't get to current density. I mean,
No.
I guess it doesn't get to current density. If we want current density, I think it's what's the percentage of short-term rentals within, the population of residents or, dwelling units to rent. And I think we've got the data here for the three big residential districts. I think if we throw in parcels, I think that's misleading because they don't exist today as rentals. So I think it would underrepresent the density.
Meaning there's parcels that don't have dwellings on them, so shouldn't be included in the total set. What you're saying?
Well, in the residential area, wouldn't parcels be buildable?
So if you just said R1, for example, you're saying what? Like there's an opportunity for another 20 something, whatever 391 minus 367 is.
Yeah, so 15.
We would remove that.
Yeah, so what I'm suggesting and is that we go with the residential column, so the third column. So we're looking at residences, and in the residential district, that's pretty much all they have. Other than vacant, lots that could be developed. Ryan, am I?
Yeah, or there might be like a church or essential public services, like we may have, a lot that's used for like Kelly sewer and water or something like that. We may have a part,
Okay.
So and given that it sounds like, at least for now, we're going to focus on the residential units, does that methodology fit with everybody? Or are you okay with that? As long as we're consistent with it? Okay.
I'm fine, because if we're answering the question truthfully, you say there's a lot of different ways to look at the data. The way we're looking at it is this way. We look at community residential R1, we see roughly a 30% ratio of STRs to residential properties or
Yeah.
whatever, 30% penetration of STRs into that zone. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I think that as long as we're all on board with that, I'm fine with it. And I didn't mean to take us down a rabbit.
No, this is what I was hoping. I think we need to know this. I think this will be foundational to our discussions. Cool. So any other questions on the data that McKenna included in either in the packet or that we got here today before we shift gears? Okay. So the next topic of the agenda, and this is really, I think, a part where we start getting into laying the groundwork for our recommendations, is what do we recommend the policy objectives of the work we do being? So, I'm looking at the master plan, tourism as the major driver is foundational. So it seems like we would want, that would be a policy. That's something we want to support in the recommendations. Another thing that shows up and I'm not saying that we should use these, I'm just giving examples for thought starters. Is the master plan, sort of the overarching goal of the master plan is to preserve the existing small town and rural character. So that could be an objective. Enforcing regulations could be an objective. Granicus, and I think everybody got this earlier, but sorted out objectives sort of by the different kinds of communities. So, we can pass that around. And Kyle, did you have anything you wanted to to recommend as we talk
No.
about this?
Our team would like to kind of just wait to distill the town hall data that we get next week as well. We are anticipating spending some time like that following Wednesday, going over it, going over the comments, the public comment we get as well. And then coming back, synthesizing that down to like a key findings memo to present at your August meeting, just as supplemental to say, here's the key findings. I know we've talked about that in multiple task force meetings in the past of like what we allude to thinking that the public will say, but we'd still like to wait until we get the full feedback from the town hall and the survey in that regard. And then from there, we'd like to help you craft these additional objectives. So we like to hear what you want to have to say, and that helps us, get an idea of what the task force is looking at. But since we are so close to that town hall, our team felt it might be prudent just to kind of pause on any, objective decisions in that regard.
Yeah, I wasn't really looking so much for decisions, but more like the discussion we had around opportunities and where, I think some objectives we would like, we want to keep our tourism economy healthy. So it seemed like we could at least get some of that work started to jumpstart again in the interest of being able to dive in more.
And then that would be, we could kind of test at your town hall next week as well. If you can come up with, maybe 3 broad objectives that you'd like to get a little test out of with the town hall and a survey next week, that would help as well. So if you have something similar to that, Madam Chair, of, support local tourism, we do have questions in the survey crafted like that. Our staff will also engage with those there in that regard too, to ask, hey, do you think it helps the local economy? And then that will help kind of test your objective as well.
I just looked back at my notes here and at the beginning, we talked about the importance of the tourism for the town. We talked about the economic impact of the town, but we also talked about the enforcement of the STRs. Those were kind of the 3 main things, if I remember right from my notes in my little book here of our first meeting. So I think that is important, that if we're having a town hall, we kind of have something to circle around. If someone says, so what are your possible goals or objectives? And those tend to be the 3 things that were started at the beginning and kind of float through all these notes through all the meetings. So I think whatever results we get from the town hall, that would be something that we could consider as main topics or topics of discussion or objectives.
I think too, also I had in my notes that kind of the same, thing, like compliance, enforcement, violations, how going forward, do we handle the situations? Because I think we know what the issues are. We'll hear again, there may be some other ones.
And the 4th could be simply improvement.
Yeah,
I think we want to make sure neighborhoods are there because we're hearing that
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
Um,
So I suggest maybe then, we can email to the group before the town hall of, maybe 3 to 6 things, and we can kind of clump them together and
great.
have an idea, have each of us do that. And so we all kind of have a game plan.
Noise,
Nothing
trash,
set in
parking.
stone yet. We're just,
Yeah, so sort of addressing the nuisances, the noise, trash.
Noise, trash, parking, occupancy. Those are the big 4.
mhm.
Ideally, you're trying to tie those to, those are actions that you're trying to tie to support the specific objectives. That's where you're trying to go, right? If we're trying to protect the community feel, coexist with the tourism community, blah, blah, blah. What do we need to do to make sure that we preserve those or meet those objectives, right? I think we're all saying the same thing. So I like the idea of just emailing those in.
Increases in any fees or anything like that, if it could go towards code enforcement of some sort.
That could be
That on the city side, or
Yep.
the law enforcement side, whatever, like money that will go towards
Correct.
being able to keep track of these things.
Or having a
and
third
write
party.
Tickets
Mhm.
and actually, have enforcement that's, actual tangible amount of money that somebody's actually, instead of just.
I know funding, everyone talks about funding, but I think, one of the things I know from just my past is internships. To help enforce, or feel like this, obviously not this summer, but, when for a summer, have a summer intern, that does work, fielding some complaints or no, so that's another opportunity, I think of, for for someone, you know, looking to get into a planning commission position or something, or consulting, so that's another option.
Well, I think it's important that at the town hall meeting, we're trying to get the information from the residents as
Right.
well.
Yep.
So, you know, I guess I would prefer not to have a discussion of each individual item. I think we just have to have a simple little agenda, like these are some of our goals, what we're working on, what the path that we would, you know, we're going to go for a recommendation, for a possible recommendation, and not necessarily get into an argument or a long discussion.
Right, I think
about it.
are these our objectives? I mean, we're not saying how we're reaching them.
Yeah.
But are these the right objectives? So what I've heard so far is to sort of address the nuisances and noise trash, protect the neighborhood feels, support healthy tourism or tourism economy, cover the costs of operating short-term rentals, and then creating processes or mechanisms to better support enforcement.
Perfect.
Anything else?
What was that last one?
It's somehow getting at how we're going to do a better job enforcing.
Yeah,
And some of it might be, I mean, so a good neighbor policy could be part of that, you know, of publicizing a number people could call if they had a complaint. All of those could, and then, you know, how are we going to logistically, like, you know, to the point, people think that we're going to have somebody drive around and tell people to turn noise down.
I
That,
think
that wouldn't be realistic, but
So we'll look at the regulations themselves to determine whether recommendations should be made around those regulations. And then the second piece of it is then how do you enforce those regulations? Is that kind of what? you're
I
thinking?
think that, I mean, I think that gets probably a step ahead of where I am, which is,
Okay.
this is sort of what we do, how we do that. I think,
tourism's a big.
yeah,
one.
tourism, I mean, is
That's-
obviously really important.
Well, you want to tourism, and then we also want to understand that we understand the importance of short-term rentals to owners' value of their home.
Yep, that's
and
good.
Ability to generate extra income to be able to support the businesses and tourism. So it's tourism, but it's also for the people who live here. They have that ability to have a little extra income
Right.
from the rentals. But if you go back, I mean, I'm like, kind of digging through, I've got my June 15th one out here where we kind of had that chart of positive, negatives and opportunities.
Right.
You know, like if you just look at those first four, like the opportunity was develop a good neighbor, you know, possibility of a website link for complaints or an 800 number. Fines and penalties, better enforcement of current noise, occupancy and parking. You know, so like there's 3 or 4 we've kind of identified, you know.
Right.
Ryan, what is the current consequence for like a vigilante type rental, someone who's got their property on Airbnb or VRBO, but they never did a fire inspection, never went through anything like that? Is there like, what are we doing about those right now?
Yeah, so if we either a complaint's made or if staff becomes aware of something through, you know, our normal day-to-day work, then we do follow up on every complaint that we get. I mean, every once in a while I'll receive them. And so we take a look at the evidence that's available that they are, whether it's online listings, some other evidence that may be provided to us that there may be short-term rental activity going on. And then now our current processes are to try to bring them into compliance. So ideally voluntarily before we have to go to the step of writing, you know, citations
Yeah.
or taking court action.
It's
So-
one thing to be
Mhm.
maybe
Sure.
lagging on a existing rental with okay, hey, I mean, it's happened with me, your fire inspections due.
Mhm.
But it's not a neglect. It's not a downright blatant disregard to our process.
Mhm.
So I think for those, it needs to be like immediate shutdown type thing to some extent.
Yeah, I think we've, you know, sent letters that have had, you know, some stronger language and,
Has anyone ever had to cease? Yeah,
since I've been here, it hasn't gotten to, but you mean like cease operation, like, look, we've had to go to court and get in some sort of an injunction and that.
yeah, just,
So we're working on some enforcements right now. but I think there's a process that we have to kind of go through. And so my understanding, working with our legal counsel, is that there's different ways we can handle it. We try to educate and then bring people into voluntary compliance when we can, or to offer some opportunities for compliance. Because if it ends up in court, we want to say that we've made a lot of efforts to try. And so I think that we've taken that approach. There are situations with various violations in the city, not specific to short-term rentals yet, where, we'll write citations and fine them if we're not getting response. I think a couple meetings ago, I shared with you that the city council has actually passed a policy that states that if we become aware of a short-term rental that's not registered, we're supposed to send them a notice and give them a chance, a certain amount of days to actually voluntarily comply. And then if they don't, the city council has established, like if you get a second notice and there's a fee associated with that. So there is a process, so. Yeah, I can pull up the policy real quick and, no, that's.
Yeah.
Just curious if it's enough that it makes people.
It wasn't
how
that
to-
much. I remember we.
$25 or something
So-
for a first notice or
Yeah.
So zoning violation in general for a first offense is $100. The city council has established like a specific fee for the investigation fees if like they're not responsive to registering. Sorry, just gotta pull it up real quick here.
So depending on what those numbers are, I mean, maybe we should look at that as this task force to just say, it could be a little bit higher and
Yeah.
maybe their violation should be
The
a
fee
little bit,
schedule.
hurt them a little bit.
Yeah.
more.
Right. And some communities, I think New Orleans was one, has done that, and it's a meaningful and,
Interesting.
yeah, I mean, it stinks. And I think that's definitely worth us
For
considering.
monetary fines, those are the types of dollars that could go towards
Mhm.
people to help regulate whatever.
South Haven, for like trash, they have a certain amount of time, and I think their first fine is $500
Yeah, for leaving their trash.
for
out.
leaving their trash out overflowing too many days. They're pretty significant with their fines.
It would be interesting for us to look at those, the fines.
Yeah.
Some of the cities have been able to allow the city to put, if they don't pay the fine, to actually have it like as a lien, but I know there's some legal questions on that. So what happens if you issue the fine, but they don't pay it?
Yeah, so kind of the process that Chris Patterson, some of you guys not you, but city attorney.
Chris, you might go in there just because we're recording and
Okay.
thank you.
So Chris Patterson, city attorney with City of Saugatuck, thanks for that question. I think that the sort of levers that you have in the enforcement fine piece, obviously you've got compliance. We have some obligations for notice and compliance that are already written in your ordinances. So we've always complied with those. And we do think that voluntary compliance is sort of a good way to start. And then your second sort of lever, city council's got that sort of permit fine piece that gets paid, that you can pay here at City Hall. But of course, your enforcement mechanism, you can issue multiple fines that would then escalate first violation, second, third. We ultimately would have to go to court if we don't end up with any type of compliance by the time we get to maybe your third or how many ever tickets that you want to issue. So we would turn that notice of violation into what we call a civil infraction citation. That citation then gets issued and we start processing those through the Allegan County District Court. And you can, the way that, when you're thinking about this for the way the fine, I mean, the fine on that type of situation would occur. So for instance, if they're renting without a permit, right? I mean, the violation is occurring each day that they rent without a permit. Or if it's a failure to get a fire inspection, that's typically we'd pursue that as a single violation unless there's really long time continued non-compliance. You can then go to the district court. You can get fines that are provided for by statute, as well as then sort of equitable relief, meaning some injunction, asking the person to comply, asking them to cease until they do comply, et cetera. And then with most processes, the third level you have that relates to a lever when you're issuing permits for a municipality is the process to codify within your ordinances where you were going to provide a notice and basically bring them back in through the same process you did when you issued it. But now you're asking them to show cause, like, why are you not complying? If you don't comply, we're going to revoke. Let's say you have someone that has a permit, but they're not complying, revoke the permit, and then proceed forward if they continue to operate through the process I just said. And then the last thing that you're going to want that would be tied into that If you've got people that are deficient, your other lever is including that deficiency, the non-compliance in your future permitting process, right? So currently, right now, you're doing 3-year STR permits. If we get someone that we had a non-compliance issue one time, they comply, maybe that's not a big deal when you do the next time, the 3-year renewal. But if you've got a, serial problem with, you've never gotten the fire inspection completed, or you don't have the contact information, that might then come up as something that is available in a part of the standard for that next 3-year certificate, or just using your current scenario as an example.
Thank you. That was helpful. Anything else before we move on to talk about the town hall? Okay. Town hall, Monday. Tuesday, of course, Tuesday, like I said. So at the high school, we'll start at 6:30. McKenna is providing discussion boards, really. Carl, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yep. So our team right now, our graphics team is finalizing the design of those, and we'll send them off to staff just for the okay on that. However, they are meant to be, as we discussed earlier, engagement style boards. So our staff will interact with the residents, patrons, the stakeholders, and then we'll have a slew of sticky notes available as well. And we'll just highlight the main comments they have, such as there's too much trash or there's too much noise. All right, noise is a concern, and we'll put it up on the board. And then at the end of the night, it'll be a nice collage of all the different comments we received. So that it's more of an informal open house setting where it's supposed to be a nice dialogue with them. It's nothing formal, and you can just ask what their insights are. We'll continue to make comments and put them on the different boards in that regard. And then we move into a more formalized public comment period on that regard to allow residents to speak their on the record for their thoughts.
Great. And for the discussion part, it would be great, I think for those of us who can attend to kind of, spread out and mill around and talk with as many people informally too. I think it'll be a good opportunity for us to, one, hear their feedback to the different discussion boards, but just listen and ask questions. And so that's 45 minutes, and then the public comment. And we've held it at the high school, assuming that we'll have more people than that could fit in here. So we'll just listen to lots of comments. So any questions, Ryan, anything to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I would just add is just for the task force members, I know we're trying to plan for kind of a 2-hour event. With the caveat that, if folks, if we have a huge response and folks, at 8:30, there's still a lot of folks that want to talk, that we'll have to stay and allow them to talk. So
Right.
I just want to let you know, we're not, can't just cut it off right at 8:30. So kind of keep that in mind as you're planning maybe for your evening, that it could be a little longer, depending on what our turnout looks like.
High school doesn't really have an auditorium right now. Where is this gonna be exactly? Is this gonna be in the auxiliary gym where the seats roll out, or the collab space, or the old cafeteria? They all kind of 3 act as the auditorium.
Right. And that's why it's kind of been described to me by your chair. And I have plans either tomorrow or early next week to kind of go, and I haven't viewed the space myself. The school was calling it the auditorium, but I think.
I
that's
think
where
it's,
we're
I
at,
mean,
yeah.
I was part of it, and part of another group that had a town hall there a couple weeks ago, and it was a basketball court with
Middle school gym.
Yep. Bleachers. So, and I think it seats more than 200.
Yeah.
And so we can have a podium, and we'll figure out the logistics of how people talk. We can either run mics or have people come. Steve.
Question for Carl. As you're putting the boards together, is there, I guess in my mind, I know like when we keep going back and we're talking about like how we had, the positives, what are some of the issues, and then the opportunities? Are you going to kind of put the boards that way? So I think it's important when people come in that they can see a board where we know there's a lot of positives to short-term rentals. We know there's opportunities, but I just don't want to have a board where it's like, what are the issues? Because again, I want them to understand that we're looking at all things and not just, the issue. So if we were going to have like 3 boards, I think they could kind of follow, the things that we talk about, the tourism.
So we discussed with staff having a large 3-foot by 4-foot, just general comments board. Anything you want to put up there, put your sticky note up on that. Another one we had tailored based on the task force insight as well, to make them neutral to positive, to not be that critical of, yes, these are bad, or yes, these are good. So we want it to be open-ended, but neutral enough that if you feel you support it, great. If you don't, you can comment there as well. So they will be designed to be neutral. Again, I'm waiting on our graphics team to finalize them, and then I'm happy, I will share them with staff as well.
Yeah, because I think the opportunity one, because some of the stuff in the survey, is asking some questions, about it would a good neighbor policy be. But to be able to have it there, and then for us, if it's up on the board, if stuff like if we're milling around, if you're working that table, some people don't even know exactly what that means. So to be able to kind of explain to them, and then they can put a post-it on saying, yeah, I think this is a really good idea. It's kind of like we're doing the waterfront and we develop some boards, and we've got like a place where they can tell us what they think the most 3 important things that we should focus on are. They give them like little dots, and it kind of came from a survey, but the board is there so they can visually see. So just wanted.
Other questions, comments on that? Surveys, we got that finalized. It was a big week for the short-term rental task force and our planning consultant and director of planning.
Yeah, survey is out, so please spread the word. It's clerk has the website updated. It's gone out in our news you can use. She put out like a separate notice today for the town hall. And the postcard should be hitting mailboxes this weekend, maybe depending on where they're going. But I see the orders completed, it says, and so everybody should get a postcard as well, kind of directing them to the city website to take the survey. If they want to take it online, they can come here to City Hall. We also have paper copies if folks don't prefer not to do it online. And then the postcard does contain information about the town hall as well.
Well, big thanks to the McKenna team, to you, Ryan, and Jamie, to you and Sarah for all of the work. I know it's been a ton, so nice job.
Madam Chair, and then regarding next week, what do you think about the idea that you would have name tags for everybody who's on the task force with like a certain, so like when you welcome everybody, you could say, hey, during the first hour, our task force members have red name tag or whatever it is, because I can't, if we're in a crowd, I don't know if everybody's
Yep.
going to pick out. So that might be just a suggestion, and we need to have that done.
Can't we get jerseys or something? Maybe a little
Everybody who's
little
got, like,
cap.
hat on,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, let's get some swag.
jacket.
Yeah. Okay, yes, that's a good point.
Oh, you all in some Department of Public Works, nice neon.
Yeah, I like that.
Walk around in the red vest or
I want
orange
orange
vest.
Yeah, we'll figure something out.
Good targets then.
That's right. Yep.
I also should have mentioned, your chair deserves a lot of recognition too, because she's been very busy doing a lot of review and doing a lot of work, but she also submitted a letter to the editor, and that's in
Right,
today's
that was-
paper as well. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, we're trying to get the word out as much as we can, so fingers crossed. Okay, well, I think that concludes the review and discussion part of the meeting. In terms of correspondence in the packet was a letter from Dan. I should, Steve, you know how to pronounce Dan's last name? I think it's Gog, well, he's probably not here, Goggin, we'll say, and CJ Badrick have both sent comments. So I hope everyone had an opportunity to read those. And then that takes us to the public comment period. So this public comment period, people can talk about anything related to short-term rentals. 3 minutes, and please begin with saying your name and where you live. So we'll start with people in the room. Hey, Nancy.
Hi, Nancy Kimball, 550 Spear Street. At the last meeting, I know this isn't really question and answer, but I brought up and several other people did too, with the surveys. Will you be able to verify that only one survey is, submitted per person? That these people are really who they say they are? What is the verification process?
So Ryan, I know this has been a question a lot of us have been giving. Can you recap that?
Yeah, so the short story is that McKenna has the ability to kind of take a look at what IP address the survey comes from. So if they're seeing multiple surveys from one IP address, we certainly understand that, maybe a few people in a household might take a survey or something like that. But if we're seeing, multiple IP addresses popping up and submitting survey responses, they're able to flag that. We did have some discussion about, should we require addresses or names, but we felt that might, discourage some participation in the survey. And then to do a statistically significant survey would be much more. So we're kind of limited in our, based on resources, but IP address is at least one way that we can make sure folks aren't maybe stuffing the ballot box here.
Okay, so
So, we're going to do the best we can. I mean, to really prevent that, you have to give everybody an individual code that they then type in, or a unique link, and that becomes a very expensive process. So given that we don't have resources to do that, we're going to do the best we can to see if, response rates look outside of the norm of what you would expect, and also from from separate IP addresses. It's not ideal, but it is one input. We'll get the town hall. So.
okay, well, I do think it's important, and I'm a little concerned about the limited resources because this is such a big issue. I don't think our resources should be that limited. My comment.
Thank you, Nancy. Anybody else in the room?
Diana Decker, 128 Elizabeth. I was listening to regarding the liens, the fees regarding if someone violates a fire code and their short-term certificate and not providing it. In some municipalities, when they're not compliant, they put that on their tax bill, those fees. They set it right on their tax records. And regarding the enforcement, I'm kind of enforcement officers. It's real nice when you go to South Haven, there's you'll see even the parking enforcement officer there. And that was walking around. And so I think that we should have some type of funds for those also. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, Jeannie Johnston, 165 Elizabeth Street. I've read the minutes. I attended last week online. And in hearing the discussion here, I have a little bit of concern, as you all did, about the data and the accuracy. And I completely understand what a task it is to try and gather all of that. And I absolutely loved, is it Manis, Mr. Manis? I liked your observation about starting with enforcement because, putting in caps into a policy when you don't have data that people have confidence in is very disturbing to me. So I like the idea. And even if you put a cap in, but you don't address the enforcement and what's going on there, you're still going to have the same problems, and that's not to say that there might not be something down the road, but at least you're going to try to address the problems that people are talking about. The other thing that you mentioned is, I don't know what the good neighborhood policy is. I did see that on the survey. I haven't seen that yet. So I think it is a good idea to put that someplace where people can understand what that was. Thank you.
Next person in the room?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to Zoom. I see Greg Hours hand raised. Greg, can you start with where you live?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm at 548 Hoffman Street, and we are a part-time short-term rental as well. So I just wanted to kind of state that up front with everyone. And I want to thank you guys all for your time, because I know sometimes it might feel a little thankless, but just wanted to thank you for taking the time and going through it. And I have a few quick points that I just want you to think about and consider as everything starts to move forward. There's been a lot of talk about the good neighbor policy. How are you going to enforce a double standard? And what I mean by that is, we rent our place maybe 50 days a year. And if I happen to be at my home and I might be making too much noise because I've been earmarked as a short-term rental, how is that going to be? How will that be affected if I decide to have a party around our bocce ball court? And my next door neighbor thinks I'm being too loud. So again, I don't think you can enforce a double standard through everyone. What applies to a short-term rental has to apply to full-time residents. And I know a lot of people probably don't like to hear that. I think one of the comments that was talked about in today's meeting, you can cut off the non-compliant people really easy. You can just go to Airbnb and basically tell them that anybody who registers a place within your zip code has to have a certificate number. If they can't, they cannot post it. Cut off those non-compliant people at the knees, because that's where they're getting access. They're getting access through Airbnb and VRBO. You can go to those platforms and shut them down very easily. And then a couple last points. You talk a lot about the data, and I come from one of the biggest data companies in the world of marketing. Have you analyzed the trends in what is happening in Saugatuck in a post-pandemic environment with travel? Is Saugatuck trending down? Are they staying the same? Are they trending up? Have you reached out to short-term rental people like myself and my wife? Because I will tell you, we are down probably about 40 days than what we normally would do, because people are able to travel again. The bachelorette parties can go to Vegas now. They can go to Nashville. They're not coming to Saugatuck in the massive amounts. And in the last 2 points I want to make is total number of hotel rooms and how many hotels downtown are adults only. Short-term rentals provide those young families that you want to attract to your town and to the town we love and that we purchased in. And then also, I think the gentleman in the check shirt had a great point. I think you should look at full-time rentals versus only people are doing it part-time, a few days, few weeks out of the year. That needs to be qualified on who is a short-term rental and who is not.
Thanks, Craig. Dick,
Thank you.
Dick, you're up next.
Trouble unmuting. There we go. One thing I want to say is an example of something that just happened this last
Oh,
week.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Jamie. Can you start with where you live?
Oh, I'm sorry.
And your name.
6576 Heron Ridge Road, Saugatuck.
And your name? Did you start?
Richard Waskin.
Thanks.
I want to just start out talking about an example of something that happened this last week that kind of points out that what you're doing here, as important as it is, it does have serious consequences to property owners. I have a new listing on the Hill. We had a lot of interest in this listing. There were going to be competing offers on this listing. One of the people who were going to be making an offer went downtown, went to City Hall to ask about what's happening with short-term rentals. As a result of even hearing about caps, that person decided to withdraw making an offer. That probably cost this homeowner a potential $25,000 with the competing offers. So my point being is that there are consequences in what this discussion is, that it's not just something on paper. It's not just something that you can throw out there and say, okay, maybe this will help. We'll put 30% cap with 35% cap. Just the discussion alone is putting a damper on the values of homes in the city. And I can't imagine what it would be like if actually you codified that in an ordinance. So I just want to say, be very, very careful in your approach on talking about caps and implementing caps. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, you're next. Can you start with your name and your address? Mark Klungel.
There, did I unmute? Can you hear me?
You're on mute. Yep.
All right. Mark Klungel, 747 Water Street. I want to talk a little bit about the whole process in the sense that COVID was an anomaly for vacation rentals. All of a sudden, nobody had to go to work. Government's giving them money. They have money. So it really put a huge growth for that short period of this COVID on vacation rentals. We're pretty much past that. I mean, this year we're down quite a bit. overall. The South is down, the West is down. I mean, we're reacting. A lot of this reaction is to the COVID influx on vacation rentals. And, you know, vacation rentals grew a lot because you had 3% interest to buy a house. I mean, low interest rates. So there was a lot of investment. Most of that's going away with 7% interest. People have to go back to work now. They can't work from anywhere, not always, but some of them still can. But I think there's a big change coming, and we're overreacting to the COVID years that really probably put a little bit of stress on the town, but it also really improved our tourism. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else online? Okay.
Keith, Chair.
Oh, Keith.
I can tell it's a little.
Keith, will you give us your name and your address? You need to
Am
unmute.
I unmuted?
Now we got you.
I know it shows up as Sue. I'll have to talk to her about that. Keith Cherrick, 560 Main Street, Saugatuck, Michigan. You know, it's my belief that in relation to the survey, only voting residents should be able to take it, as it affects residents that are here, who live here, who have a primary residence exemption. And I say that because, you know, it affects, I think we're losing population in that respect, because as one of the examples of that, because we're going to have trouble down the line filling committees. We're going to have down the line filling maybe even council members. And if we keep losing residents, as we have been done over the last 10, 20 years, it becomes harder and harder to fill committees. And so, I mean, that's one of my concerns, is that, you know, I mean, outsiders can't vote for our council members. You know, they can't fill committees. This committee is an exception, of course, but I think that it would be my belief that the survey should only be taken by locals because it affects them the most. My other concern is it's really easy to game the online survey. Any computer can have multiple IP addresses, you know, and I won't tell you how to do it, but it's really simple. And I, for one, actually voted 5 times the other day just to see if I could do it. And I did. And, you know, so I'm not sure there's any, to me, it's like there probably are people that are going to maybe game the system, or I don't know how much. I know the council finally votes on this, but that's just another one of my concerns. But I do want to thank you for your time, because I know this is a contentious issue in the community, pros and cons, but thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. Any comments from any of the members?
I got one.
Yeah, go for it.
You know, tonight I heard, you know, talk about numbers of the survey and resident, non-resident and all that. And, you know, I'm not a resident of Saugatuck. I love it just as if I was, but I'm about 250 feet north of the line. But I do think it's important that the survey and people engaged in it, we understand what people are saying about it. So if they want to fill it out 5 times, and I mean, I hope they're smart enough to fill it out differently with different opinions on each line item, but I think it's important information to be able to understand however many times they filled it out. I also think the town hall is going to be important to hear about it. And again, I learned more just driving through the neighborhoods, talking to someone that was walking out to their mailbox. I didn't even introduce who I was. I think I just asked, you know, do you have any short-term rentals around here? And I think that that's probably the most information I got out of it. And I feel that that's part of my job as a non-resident of the city, is to try to see my perspective of it, because it, you know, it does affect what I have involved in the city as well. And, you know, I've probably got one of the larger tourist attractions in town. So I love having people come in, and I love having residents come on our Residents' Day ride so that they can understand what we do every day. And I just think it's so important, and I'm looking forward to the town hall meeting.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Anybody else?
Just the one online comment about noise, whether you're a resident or not. I completely agree, and I think we've addressed this in the past, but number one, it is so subjective. And it is going to be a hard thing to do, but I go back to just trying to be preventative and get to the problem before it starts. But noise is noise, and whether you're a full-time resident, I think the example someone used was having a graduation party at the last meeting. So I just wanted to echo his thoughts that I agree with that, and that needs to be considered when we start getting in a little more detail on these compliance issues. And I guess you can say that for all the top four things we spoke about, the noise, the trash, the parking, that's all.
Anybody else? I'll make a quick comment on the good neighbor policy. We don't have one now. So we've been talking about one thing we might do is just sort of educate everybody. I mean, residents, non-residents, about how we can live together peaceably, and a number of communities do those. So great. Well, with that, does anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for everybody who showed up.